Elsewhere, the fighting was no less savage. In a wheat field, regiments advanced and fell back again and again, the golden stalks mowed down as surely as the men who trampled them. At a rocky place called Devil's Den, sharpshooters perched among the stones, their rifles cracking without pause. I saw men crawl desperately for cover, only to fall still under the merciless aim of unseen enemies. The cries of the wounded rose above the smoke, mingling with the metallic shriek of cannonballs ricocheting through the rocks. By the night of July 2nd, the Union Army still held its ground, though battered and bleeding. Fires burned across the fields, and the groans of the dying echoed in the dark. I wrote in my notes, "The land itself seems to cry out, as if the soil rejects the blood poured upon it." Then came July 3rd, the day that would decide the fate of nations. At midday, the Union lines fell eerily silent. Across the field on Seminary Ridge, I saw Confederate troops massing in long gray lines. Nearly 15,000 men prepared for one desperate assault. It would be remembered as Pickett's charge. The bombardment began first. For 2 hours, Confederate cannon thundered, their shells screaming across the valley, bursting among Union guns and infantry. The ground shook, the sky filled with smoke and fire. I lay flat in the grass, the air thick with the acrid stench of powder, my ears ringing. When the barrage ended, an ominous silence fell. Then came the sound, drums rolling, officers shouting, and the Confederate lines advanced. They came across the open fields, shoulder to shoulder, their banners flying, their bayonets gleaming in the sun. It was a sight both terrible and magnificent. Union cannon opened fire, tearing gaps in the ranks, but still they marched. Closer and closer they came, the ground littered with bodies, the survivors stepping over the fallen. At the stone wall on Cemetery Ridge, the two armies collided. Muskets roared, bayonets clashed, men fought with fists and rifle butts in a storm of smoke and blood. For a moment, the Confederate flag waved atop the Union line. But then the tide broke. Union reinforcements surged forward, enveloping the attackers. The gray ranks wavered, shattered, and at last fell back, retreating across the field they had so bravely crossed. I will never forget the sight of that field after the charge. It was carpeted with bodies, gray and blue mingled together, the grass trampled and stained red. Hats, muskets, torn flags lay scattered in the silence. The cries of the wounded carried faintly on the hot breeze. It was as if death itself had spread his cloak across the valley. Lee rode among his men, his face grave but calm. "It is all my fault," he told them. Yet they still cheered him, their faith unbroken even in defeat. Across the lines, Union soldiers cheered too, their relief mingled with exhaustion and grief. Gettysburg was theirs. 3 days of slaughter had left more than 50,000 casualties. Never before, and never again, would America see such a battle on its soil. Yet in that terrible cost lay a turning point. Lee's invincible aura was broken. The Confederacy would never again carry the war so far into northern land. Months later, I returned to Gettysburg. The dead had been buried, the fields tilled once more, but the scars remained. I stood among the graves as President Lincoln gave a few brief words, the Gettysburg Address. His voice was steady, his message simple, that these men had not died in vain, that the nation would have a new birth of freedom, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, would not perish from the earth. I wrote that day, Gettysburg is not only a place of death, it is a place of rebirth. Here the Union has turned, and here America begins anew. By the summer of 1863, the war had become a giant with two bleeding heads. In the West, Union armies pressed down the Mississippi, strangling the Confederacy's lifeline. In the East, Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia seemed unstoppable, its victories at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville filling Southern hearts with pride and Northern hearts with dread. Now Lee dared the boldest move of all, an invasion of the North. I followed the Union Army of the Potomac as it shadowed Lee's march through Maryland and into Pennsylvania. Farmers fled their fields, wagons groaned under hurriedly loaded goods, church bells tolled warnings. In the streets of Gettysburg, I saw fear and defiance in equal measure. The townspeople whispered that the war had at last come to their very doorsteps. The battle began on July 1st, 1863. Union cavalry under General Buford clashed with Confederate infantry west of town. I watched from a ridge as gray ranks advanced through the morning mist, their lines crisp, their flags whipping in the wind. The Union horsemen dismounted, fighting stubbornly to hold them back until reinforcements arrived. But by afternoon, the Union line crumbled, and blue-coated soldiers streamed through Gettysburg's streets in retreat, their faces grim, their muskets abandoned. The Confederates occupied the town, their cheers echoing against brick walls and church steeples. That night, Union forces dug in on a series of hills south of Gettysburg, Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, and the long ridge called Cemetery Ridge. I walked among them in the darkness, the air heavy with sweat, gunpowder, and whispered prayers. Lanterns flickered as officers placed cannon, their wheels sinking into the soil. The men knew the coming day would bring the test of their lives. July 2nd dawned hot, the sun glaring on fields of ripening wheat and rocky hillsides. Lee struck at the Union flanks. I hurried to the southern end of the line, to a rocky outcrop called Little Round Top. There I witnessed desperate fighting as Union soldiers clung to the heights against furious Confederate assaults. Musket fire crackled, cannon boomed, men grappled hand to hand among the boulders. When the Union line wavered, Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain of Maine ordered a bayonet charge, his men sweeping down the slope in a wild rush that drove the enemy back. The hill was saved, and with it, the Union flank,